I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hey, y'all. Before we get into this episode, we do have exciting news. Our podcast has been nominated as Best Local Podcast here in Savannah by Connect Savannah. Every year, they have their Best of competition. It's a very acclaimed competition here in Savannah. And so it's a really big honor to be nominated for it. We really do need your help voting, though. You can vote every single day, and we have a link in our description for it. So it is under Best Local Podcast for the most haunted city on earth. But while you are there, we are nominated for some other various ventures. So Savannah Underground is nominated for Best Local Theater Production, and Chris's improv troupe, Odd Lot, is nominated for Best Local Comedy Troupe, and then JT was nominated for Best Local Theater Director, and that is under John Taylor Timmons, if you didn't know his full name by now. So, but we do really appreciate you guys voting, and it is a big deal if you win this competition. So let's be the first ghost podcast to win that category.
Come on.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Most Haunted City on Earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And I'm JT Timmons.
And you might be wondering why, if you're watching this and not listening, why we have a big cupcake in front of us.
And if you are listening, you now know there's a big cupcake in front of us.
It's massive.
It's massive with candles in it that say 100. No, this is not our 100th episode.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was.
That was a long time ago.
But instead, this is actually to honor JT's past grandmother, who would have been turning 100 years old today. And so, woohoo! So in the honor, in honor of honoring our ancestors and things like that, we decided to bring a cupcake and light this for her.
Yes, absolutely.
And you guys can watch me struggle with the lighter.
And while you're doing that, I actually have some fun facts about Grandma Timmons. All right. So obviously she was born in 1923. Her favorite sayings were "Hell's Bells" or "Oh Piffle."
Oh, Piffle.
Oh, Piffle. When she got upset.
I'm going to start with that one.
When she got upset, it was "Hell's Bells" or "Oh Piffle."
It's very Southern of her.
Oh, yeah. These actually might be a couple longer talking points. So let's go ahead and wish her happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Grandma Timmons. Happy birthday to you.
Awesome. And the smoke's going towards Chris, so that means that Chris is needing some cleansing.
All right, very cool. So she actually graduated with multiple degrees, including a master's degree in botany in the late 40s. Wow. That would have been really, really big, obviously, for a woman in the 40s.
Absolutely.
That's pretty amazing.
She was great with a plant, y'all. Like, seriously.
Yeah, she had a super green thumb.
Got a master's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing is she showed pugs. Her husband and dad, they showed pugs, and at the most pugs that they've had was 26 at one time.
At one time?
At one time.
That is a lot of...
Yep. And I actually met the last pug that she ever had. His name was Tiki. Tiki 1 Timmons, because after Tiki, we got Tiki 2 Timmons.
Tiki 2.
Yep. Tiki 2 was black pug. He was the sweetest thing.
I would like to say that those are excellent Star Wars names. Tiki 1 and Tiki 2.
Tiki 1 and Tiki 2. That's funny.
I love it.
Oh,
but yes.
Cool.
So if you're listening, send a little bit of love to JT's dad today.
Yeah.
Of course, he's missing his mother, but also send a little love to Grandma Timmons out there, and say you love your family too while you're at it. So
Absolutely.
But
yes.
We have to thank a couple new parrot
Yes,
junkies.
to send some more love to people.
Yeah.
The new parrot junkies.
Yep.
Speaking of 100, how close? Yeah, I was just saying.
We're nearing 100. Nearing 100. All right. So we got, thank you so much, Kelsey, Kristen, Lexi Golford, Dulce Maria, and Alexandra Lynch. Thank y'all so much. It means the world to us that you guys have decided to become parajunkies.
Yes, and if you would like to become a parajunkie, you can find us over on Patreon. You get exclusive content. You get pretty much full access to talking to us all the time. You also get to be a part of a really cool group of people, and you get to be a part of Parajunkie Day that's coming up.
Yes,
Parajunkie Day.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So super exciting stuff going on over on Patreon. But to get into today's topic, we are going to be doing a further deep dive into the Hatman.
Hatman.
Since a lot of y'all seem to be having a lot of experiences with Hatman.
Absolutely. Whenever Hatman is brought up, people either for the first time really think about experiences that they had in their lives, and they're able to categorize it as a Hatman experience, because sometimes people don't realize that it's a thing.
Okay.
They only realize that they had a strange experience oftentimes when they were young, and when they think back on it, they're like, you know what? I think he did have a hat. Or they knew he had a hat, but they didn't realize that it was kind of a communal experience, that lots of people are experiencing it.
So for the people that are like, this is their first episode ever and they don't know anything about Hatman, what is Hatman?
So it's kind of a loaded question because and we'll get into this in this episode. There's a lot of different theories of what people think Hatman is. But basically, the Hatman is someone that basically is seen usually with a wide brim hat or a top hat, sometimes a fedora, sometimes a bowler's hat, and usually what looks like a trench coat.
Right.
Fully shadowy figure. Sometimes people have reported to see him with red eyes. Usually he stands in people's doorways at night, but there have been reports of him being outside. There have been reports of him standing in the corner of your room.
And we're starting to get reports of people hearing him speak.
Yes.
Seeing his eyes, which is, kind of out of the norm, because usually it's a featureless shadow, oftentimes darker than the darkness around you. So even you could be looking into a shadow in the dark and still make out that there's something darker standing in the shadow.
Ooh.
Yes. And he also usually moves like a human being. I know when I experienced Hatman when I was a child, I remember him walking from my doorway to my sister's room, and he walked just like a normal person, which is very frightening when you're like 7 years old. But apparently when I did my deep dive into Reddit, going down that rabbit hole of people's experiences, a lot of people report saying the same thing. He walks like a human, he moves like a human, he gives off this domineering energy as like a human almost, but he's not. Like you can tell he's not. Right. It's very weird. He's
a solid presence. He's not ethereal, in that sense of something creepifying. You're looking at something and you're having this issue. There is a distinct sensation that is a person standing there, but then the realization that A, it couldn't be, followed by B, it doesn't feel like a person, but it does feel present.
Right.
So if I'm gonna kind of like play devil's advocate a little bit and say I've kind of, since we started talking about the Hatman, I've actually wondered, is it potentially, I think it's called like a Mandela effect or something like that, because here's the thing, what is a movie? Very, very well-known, famous movie. You know where I'm going with this.
You're not the only one to think this, because this is a common theory. Actually, the Freddy Krueger theory.
The power of suggestion.
What were you thinking?
The front of The Exorcist.
Oh,
the movie poster.
Sure.
The Exorcist. It's black figure with that hat, and it is the most notable. It's one of the most, other than maybe Jaws, one of the most notable movie posters.
Yeah, but even before that, most film noir deal with I want to say, is it The Third Man, where it's the shadow of Orson Welles on the wall with the hat, and it's just a shadow of him in the fedora. There's countless things, but what's interesting is that iconography, the idea of a shadow in the shape of a man, and seeing it and realizing it. If we even go back to before hats were a normal thing, what people saw regularly and reported upon were a figure in a hood, which would also serve the same purpose as a hat. So when you have these hooded, shrouded figures, but they're like, it's all a shadow, but I know he was wearing robes and a hood, which suggests that in the time that they were seeing this, I mean, the Grim Reaper, by sheer force of imagery is a shadowy, shrouded figure wearing a big hooded thing that obscures the face, that obscures the features. So the argument isn't are people seeing this Exorcist poster and then implying this shadowy figure, or did the makers of the movie know that this inherently gets people to show a shadowy figure in a hat? The shadowy figure in a hat, which came first? Which image came first? Because I had brought up Spring Hill Jack. Spring Hill Jack was a Victorian era cryptid, but his description was that he wore a cloak, a cape, or a long coat, and a hat that obscured his face. And in Spring Hill Jack stories, sometimes you'll see his red eyes, and a lot of times he breathes sulfurous smoke. So but the imagery of a figure whose face is obscured, who's wearing a wide brim hat, that it goes to that area, and then you could stretch it further because highwaymen, very classically wore big hats, masks, scarves around their face, long overcoats, and they would hold people up. So they're an object of fear. Riding down the roads, you might be jacked by, a highwayman.
Scarecrows.
Excellent example. Scarecrows, and scarecrows are used all the time in horror imagery, because they are freaky. They are human-esque, and they live in the uncanny valley. If you've ever been around a scarecrow that was lovingly made, they're oftentimes creepy as all get out. You're looking at them and you're like, oh, why? Why did you do that? It's like, what do you mean? It's to scare away crows. It's like, it's going to scare everything away.
Yeah.
That is going to scare everything away.
So the thing is, though, Jay, I will tell you this. I don't think I had seen The Exorcist at the point when I saw The Shadow Man. And my sister, I know for a fact that she did not see that movie.
But the front of the movie.
No,
the poster.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, Jay, like my sister and I had the same experience. And my sister does not like scary stuff. She's not into it. It's interesting that like years after we had this experience, we both were able to describe the same thing. And it was me talking about my experience and she saying, wait, I saw that same thing in my in my thing. So there's a lot of people who kind of think the same thing as you, but a lot of people attribute its creation to Freddy Krueger.
Okay.
But there have been multiple people who have come out and said, like, I experienced the Hatman way before Freddy Krueger was ever a thing. And there's actually some evidence that there were drawings on cave walls of something that could resemble a Hatman-like entity.
Okay.
Well, even Wes Craven, in the creation of Freddy Krueger, speaks about the phantom with the hat that obscures the face and that notion of the hidden thing, because he was drawing from cultural boogeymen, and it came across his plate that a character who's wearing something that obscures the face, because in the first instances that you see Freddy Krueger in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, he is just a shadow with that silhouette. With this bizarre, inhuman yet human form. Okay.
So a lot of the boiling down of the theories equates Hatman to being this eternal being of sorts. Okay. Something that's always been around. Now, where it kind of tangents is why the Hatman is here and doing this. Because some people, are like, he's just a simple shadow person. And depending on your belief system, shadow people can be evil entities, and some shadow people can just be, a thing that's there.
Remnants,
right. Exactly. So, there's some people who think that the Hatman is solely just a watcher, someone who just is kind of around, that's observing humanity. But then you go on to the far other side of things, and some people believe that he could be an extraterrestrial entity that basically has been around to, his job is to observe humans.
Well, the classic Men in Black.
Right.
Classic Men in Black are people who wear all black. They have fedoras. They're hatmen when it comes down to it. And it's interesting because we know and can trace the lineage of Slender Man.
Yeah.
We know who created Slender Man. We know for what purpose. And we know that Slender Man went from being a fabricated thing to being a heavily believed, even influential supernatural entity through the power of suggestion, through the power of people's beliefs and people's ideologies, and the fact that shadows are so desperate for form and so desperate for identity that you can literally name your poison. It's like the end of Ghostbusters. You know, they thought of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Stay Puft Marshmallow Man showed up. So, you know, the Hat Man might just be a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. It may just be a collective dread and fear that we have of this shadowy, unknown figure that kind of, you know, lives on the periphery, and we're giving it shape because we are kind of watching the birth of a cryptid. We're watching the birth of an entity that when you start scratching at it, it's like, wow, this seems to go way back. You know, this seems to have legs that go way, way back. And these might be just loose associations that we're able to solidify. And the more solid we make it, the more solid he becomes. This is what I always, you know, talk about in terms of what is the power of the human mind, what is the power of the human spirit. We are responsible for the reality we exist in. You know, you hear about people doing manifestations, you hear about people doing all these things that to improve their lives through the sheer power of will. Well, our fears are very solid beliefs. They kind of live in this weird place. We can be afraid of things that we do not think exist, but we still fear them. And that becomes this sort of amalgamous place where things can become a force in our reality.
Yeah, it's kind of like it.
It is like it. Well, and Stephen King, almost every horror writer crosses the threshold of saying which comes first, the fear of the creature or the creature.
Yeah.
You know, and that becomes this idea that there are maybe spiritual things, maybe just, you know, raw material all around us, and we're molding it like, you know, a clay sculpture, and we're saying, okay, and then he had horns, and then he had a tail, and then all of a sudden we're seeing and feeling these things. When you get into that like more tribal sensation of existence, when tribes would gather together, they would create the monsters of their, you know, of their belief structure based on a sense of protection, a need to ward and to be together against a thing. And the thing that they create oftentimes was a hodgepodge of the dangers around them. And then maybe they continued on. Maybe they became physical. Maybe Bigfoot is just a bunch of native beliefs of the danger of, you know, the encroaching other, the thing that is out there. And it manifested into a reality and manifested into something that people are still experiencing to this day, echoes of belief that turn to solid things.
Right. I mean, the thing is I'm kind of on the side of, you know, this might be an entity that's been around for a long time, just because it's so strange that there's been so many accounts of this entity for a long time, but it's almost like, you know, with the invention of the internet and people actually being able to share their experiences and get to know other people who they're like, wait, I had a similar experience of things of that nature. And that is what's made it more of a sensation. Okay. Maybe it was more of an isolated situation.
Right. It was very dismissible.
Right.
When you're alone. When you're alone and you have an experience, you can quickly be like, well, you know, I guess that happened, but no. And then somebody else, because that's what I was saying was when I talk to people, I was like, have you ever heard of Hatman? And a lot of people are like, no. And then I explained it to them. I can watch their brains being like, oh gosh, when I was a kid, or oh gosh, when, you know, when I was a teenager, you know, just a few years ago, they had this story that is forming in their heads, a memory of which they suppressed because it served no purpose. Yeah. It was like, what a weird moment. What a weird moment when I thought there was a guy in a hat just standing over there. But when they hear that other people have this experience, it suddenly becomes almost obsessive to them. The parajunkie, you know, gene kicks in. You know, all of a sudden they're like, oh, ghost heroin, let's go. Let's go. So then you find them doing deep dives into Hatman and finding that, oh gosh, this is something that people have reported and recorded, and there's a lot of issues. And when you think of like just the history of ghosts or spirits that you know of, we live with the idea that we're being watched by some entity. That has always been a part of our culture, is that there's a guardian angel out there, that there's some threshold lurker watching us, Santa Claus. We accept that that there are spiritual beings whose entire responsibility in the universe is to watch us. And in some cases intervene when there's danger, but oftentimes that's not the case. They're not watching us to help us. They're watching us almost as if to record our existence.
Something. Yeah, that'd be what an alien does for sure.
Right.
Sure. And that brings up the whole alien concept, because a lot of people don't believe that aliens are extraterrestrial. They think they're extra dimensional.
Yeah.
That our obsession with scientific explanation always falls short because our science isn't there yet. We haven't gotten far enough along to really examine what it means to have interdimensional travel or interdimensional beings, and whether or not they are in fact terrestrial, just of a different dimension. And if we're talking about time, then time being the dimension that separates us. All of these things become huge questions, and who knows, on the other dimension, it may be very ordinary to them to I'm going to peek in on that guy. Yep, he's still there. Okay, everything's fine.
Now, I wonder if, their purpose is to be scary, solely because, Madison, this really, really well about me is what I find very frightening, because obviously fear is subjective and everything, but what I find very frightening is when something is looking at you through a window. There's a barrier, but it's a breachable barrier, and it's looking at you through a window or through a door threshold, and it's almost like I want to come in. And that, to me, and I've used this in horror. There's a lot of directors that have used this in filmmaking for sure, because it is an inherently frightening thing. I wonder if they know that. I wonder if the Hatman knows that, and the Hatman is let's see what I can let's see if I can get this person to notice me, because I'm silhouetting myself in your if you think about it, the door being cracked or closed or open, I mean, that means something to kids, right?
Absolutely.
That means something to kids.
Well, so here's where I get into, when I start really thinking about Hatman, I'm I feel like there are some Hatmen that are not inherently trying to scare you, because at least when I think back to my experience, I was freaked out because I was that's creepy looking,
Oh yeah.
But I didn't necessarily feel threatened. I didn't feel like I was going to be harmed. It just felt uneasy. But
you noticed it.
Well, of course I noticed it. It's
but if it's in the shadows,
no,
then you might not notice it.
Here's the thing about Hatman: when you actually see it, it is darker. It's the blackest black you can imagine.
It is the absence of something.
Yes. And so it's, it was more so just this uneasy feeling of ugh, stop staring at me. That's really freaky, bro. It's, but then there's some people that do get that sensation of he's going to hurt me. Our previous ghost mail where, the listener was saying how it's been following them, and the red eyes, and is this some kind of omen or whatever. I feel that's a different type of Hatman.
Sure. And that goes into that whole concept, because if it is feeding off of your fear, if it is creating your fear, then it seems like it should be getting stronger, more aggressive, and because it's feeding, because it's getting the fear off. So it doesn't make sense that these isolated events, because that's oftentimes when I'm talking to people, they'll have one event in their life where it's one time I had a friend who was I stayed out past when I was supposed to get into a house, which was, he was at a playground when he was 8. And back in the day, when the street lights come on, you better be in the house. So he was out, and the street lights came on.
Okay.
And he was like, "Oh no!" And so the story he tells me is he jumps off the swing set, and he lands, and he starts to run. But as he's running, directly under a street lamp was a man standing there with this wide hat. And when he first saw it, it froze him. He was like, "Don't move! If I don't move, he can't see me," kind of thing. It's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But he said, "I remember watching him, and he just started walking backwards out of the light, into the shadows and into a bush past him, and he never knew if it was a real person, if it was a ghost. But when I told him about Hatman, he was like, let me tell you this story. You'll never believe this. I had an experience with a guy, and he never once thought it was a ghost.
Sure.
He never once thought it was, something threatening or something bizarre. So, when we think about Hatman encounters, so many of them are isolated. So when we hear like repeated visitations of the Hatman, it's like you might be having some different relationship with the Hatman. You might, or it might be a different entity that has the same properties. This is a fascinating field of discovery because it's all taking in the stories and listening to them and saying, okay, there is a category that seems to be the watcher. He's just watching. And when you see him, it seems accidental.
Sure.
It seems like maybe he's always there, but just every now and then he's, accidentally somewhere you can see him. And then there are accounts where he's coming in, he's coming closer, he's trying to communicate. And the one that I found interesting was the harbinger of death. Like he appears and then someone in your family dies or someone dies. That is like, oh, that's a whole different thing because I'm familiar with the Lady in Black. The Lady in Black is a very old story, a very old ghost. That means that a child in your family will die if you see the Lady in Black. I'm like, oh, that's very specific. What a specific ghost. And then to find out that it's kind of a flat and wide story. If you see the Lady in Black, a child in your family is going to pass. And I'm like, okay, that almost sounds like the Hatman incident that you're talking about, except it's not exclusively a child and it's not exclusively your family.
And it's not trying to kill anyone.
No, maybe. It's just telling.
Well, and that's it. The Lady in Black is not trying to kill anybody. The Lady in Black is a sign.
Oh, like Mothman.
Kind of like Mothman, absolutely. And I think we had a story like that where somebody was saying that when the Hatman came, there was going to be death. That's kind of an interesting thing because some people do have the uncanny ability to predict death, and it may be a type of spirit that you may or may not be able to see, but when you see it, might be the shape of a Hatman. That might be just the garb of the specter of death. Like I said, the Grim Reaper is literally a shrouded figure, a shadowy shrouded figure whose features are obscured by his hood. And we've taken to putting the skeleton because we also have just a skeleton. In early images of the Grim Reaper, it was just a skeleton. He wasn't wearing robes. It was just a skeleton with a scythe. And then over time, people are like, I have seen this thing, this specter of death, this, and the more imagery that we would get of the Grim Reaper in that cloak with this thing that hung over its face so that you couldn't tell, that it was the Grim Reaper, and that gave way to different, because, I think that image was not unlike what you would see walking down the street. Right. If you're walking down the street and people were walking, looking like this, you're like, oh, that's just a weird guy wearing a hood. That's the same thing here. Hats are not so uncommon that we're like, oh, well, that's weird.
Right.
You're like, oh, it's a guy wearing a hat. And then, of course, you hear all these other stories like, oh, I'm a part of an international conspiracy of spirits.
It's interesting, though, that there's so many different omens for death specifically.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Like if you get into tea leaf reading and any kind of divination or, like the theory of like black dogs being the grim, if you will.
Thank you, Harry Potter.
Tartan is not a grim.
No, well, he doesn't look like a grim.
Oh. No, the black dog is like a giant,
like a big hulking, like
almost wolf-like.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Creature.
Yeah. If that shows up to you, basically, like you're about to
Now, so the Hatman mainly shows itself to like kids, right?
Not necessarily. I think
I think a lot of people's first experiences are child. I hear it a lot that people say when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I definitely know that there are plenty of adults who have seen him and experienced him, and for the first time too. Like not like, oh, this has happened before. It's literally like, oh, this is weird.
What if it's like a protector instead of something trying to scare you? Like, what if it's actually like looking over you, making sure you're good?
I mean, that's a theory too.
That's the watcher idea, the guardian angel.
So, like, the problem is there's so many nuances as to what it could be.
Yeah.
Because a lot of entities can look horrifying, but they're actually good entities. And then there's a lot of really bad entities that are beautiful.
Ever heard of a biblical description of what an angel looks like?
God,
That's what I thought that.
They're horrifying.
Right when she said
absolutely
that.
horrible. Well, and it's funny because, and you talk about this, I want to say Black Mass does a good job of is it Black Mass? No, Midnight Mass does a good job of that one statement that is inherent to angels: be not afraid. If you were a beautiful blonde winged, thing going, oh, you don't have to say, be not afraid. Be not afraid is not, something that beautiful things have to start. I've never been approached by a supermodel going, be not afraid. It's because it's a multi-winged eyeball spinning monster of blah. And you're like, oh yeah, that's terrifying. So be not afraid. I'm sorry, it's too late. I'm looking at you. I'm afraid. So yeah,
and it could just be that a lot of times why these situations stick with us, is because when you're a kid and you see something staring at you, that's unnerving, and even if it is a good entity or some sort of, child protecting entity, it's, maybe they'll evolve one day and maybe be a little less creepy or
sure. Well, and with understanding comes less fear. Fear is inherently the unknown. It is inherently what you don't know. At the base of all fears comes this threshold of knowledge. The second you dip into what you don't know, that's where fear really begins. Because if you're afraid of anything, it's not the thing itself. It's the unknown quality, quantity, the unknown purpose, the unknown damage it can do you, the unknown aspect of any given thing. Because even people who are afraid of I'm terribly afraid of fire because I got burned when I was a kid. They're using the trauma to suggest that was what was afraid. But the truth is you're afraid of how much worse it can get because you know how bad it was. You're not afraid of experiencing it again. You're afraid of experiencing something beyond what you've already experienced. I have a terrible phobia. Well, I have so many phobias. But I do have a terrible phobia of shots, of getting shots. And in my experience, I can't even feel a shot. But I still have this fear, this deep fear. I can't look at getting a shot. When somebody gives me a shot, I look away. And I'm diabetic, so I have to give myself shots. I look away, which is terrible. Don't do that. But there is this notion that I was like, well, what am I afraid of? I know what it feels like. I know I'll survive it. I know it doesn't actually hurt. I was like, well, what I'm really afraid of is this unknown sensation that I've ascribed to the shot. Something like, the needle breaking off in my arm or some weird thing like that, which is an unknown. And there's no reason for me to fear it because I've never experienced it and I've never known anybody to experience it. But somehow it is a part of my fear structure is, I'm terrified of needles. I still don't understand it because I can administer shots to myself, but I still have the phobia.
So why do y'all think we got 3 emails in a row, like literally in a row, that were about the Hatman?
So I do think it's slightly a coincidence, but a part of it being is that it's become such a worldwide phenomenon right now about the Hatman because of the nature of TikTok and the internet in general. People are starting to open their minds to certain things. And also, I think it's a really common experience that so many people have had. And sometimes that's their only ghost experience. And that's, totally fine. But I think it's like the internet either, bringing these things into our lives because we now know they exist or, just solely bringing out the various Hatman stories from the woodworks,
Yeah, it's also the idea of lining up of things because I feel like a trend can easily be started, and even if it is very subtle, because I remember, like when I first heard of the Mothman, and then it became like such an avalanche of information about the Mothman. And there is a word for it, which is when you first hear something almost immediately after you start hearing it everywhere. Like when you buy a car. If you buy a car that you've never really driven before, like, I've got a Ford Escort, and I bought this Ford Escort, and then you go driving around, and all of a sudden you see Ford Escorts everywhere. Everyone's driving a Ford Escort. How weird. And that's the kind of thing that this is. It's it is kind of coincidental, but it's aligning with the fact that we're looking. It's aligning with the fact that we are opening to the idea, and we're becoming more aware of it. And we're probably putting out some strong vibes of we'll talk your ear off about this subject if you put it in front of us. So
comment your Hatman stories. Maybe we'll read them.
We'll
Please
read
do.
all the Hatman stories.
Yeah.
Bring the Hatman. Send it to our ghostmail.
Yes, ghostmail and all that.
And don't forget your favorite cryptids. So many wonderful cryptids are out there, and we are not shy about cryptids. We spend zero time hating on any specific supernatural entity, and we're not afraid of UFOs either. If you got some UFO stories, please share those because they're fascinating. They're endlessly fascinating, and for some reason, there's a huge divide in the community of like supernatural and extraterrestrial. And it's like, why? People can believe 100% in Bigfoot and be like, there's no such thing as UFOs, and back and forth. Or, people believe in ghosts and think that UFOs are trash, or people believe in UFOs and think that ghosts are ridiculous. And it's like, what is happening? Why would we draw such thick lines around things we just don't understand or know? It's fascinating to me because, like, if you're going to believe in something that is fantastical and very difficult to prove, you at least have to leave a little open room for everything else that is, that exists in that same framework. We spend zero time telling people that what they think is out there is ridiculous.
It's actually interesting because I think there's a lot of crossover between extraterrestrial beliefs and otherworldly beings and paranormal. I will tell you guys a story that I don't think I've ever mentioned on this podcast.
I know, right? Wow.
Very weird one. Florida is a weird place in general, and I think I lived in a hotbed of odd things that would happen. But when I was a kid, the way I had my bed positioned was basically I had it in the corner of my room right next to this big window so that if I turned over, what would that be, to my right, you could see right out the window. So basically, one night, it was probably like, I want to say like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. or something like that, random day of the week. It wasn't anything like a special night or something. And I wake up because I just hear on my window. And mind you, my house was 2 stories and there was no way to get up there. So it was very weird that there'd be knocking on my window. And so I ignored it at first because I was like, that's weird. Maybe it's a bird or something. And then I hear again, and I'm like, okay. So I start to get nervous. I'm like, I don't want to really open my eyes right now because it's like really freaky. You don't want to be scared. Right. But eventually on the third knock, I open my eyes and I look out the window and there's this silver figure like shining. Like if you've ever seen pyrite, like the crystal pyrite, it glistened like that with blacked out eyes, no hair, no features, like no nose, very small lips and things like that. No notable features standing outside my window. And I will never forget that image in my head. And so from there, that was kind of when I started getting interested in more extraterrestrial thoughts because I was like, that doesn't look like any ghost I've ever seen in my life. And why would it be tapping on my window in the middle of the night on my second floor house? JT's like, I'm never sleeping in that room again.
Literally.
But I never had it happen again. But I did have so many dreams of aliens when I was a kid. After that experience, for years, it would be the same reoccurring dream of me being brought up into a ship and things like that. What? I'm not kidding.
And worth mentioning, Florida is a hotbed of UFO activity. A lot of sightings in Florida, and people think that it's because we have Cape Canaveral there. We're literally sending things into space there, so a lot of people believe that there's a lot of extraterrestrial activity at the spot where we send ships into space. They come and they gather, and I've heard countless stories. I actually met a man once who claimed to be who worked for the United States government, and he was a full-on participant in communicating with. He claimed to be basically a radio that the government can use to talk to aliens. And I never really thought about it until years later. they started releasing the documents on it, and the program that he said he was a part of is all over those documents. I was like, so at the very least, he knew about the program. Whatever his involvement was, he was utilizing all the terms and all the phrases because they stood out in my head. But when I was reading through, and a lot of these were redacted, you're reading and it's like, oh gosh. He was not, at the very least, he was dead on with all of these events, which made me wonder because he said some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because he said that, the government utilized psychics, remote viewers, to facilitate communication because basically aliens can speak or communicate through waves that are mental, not like radio. They don't use radio waves. They use something that our minds use when we're practicing like remote viewing or ESP or anything like that. Fascinating. But at the time that I heard it, I was like, oh, I can't process this. This is so foreign to me. But I always kept it in the back of my head because he was a very interesting person. He didn't seem, crazy by any stretch of the imagination, but he had been shot in the head. So,
that'll do it.
And that's what he was, a ranger who got shot in the head. And he said when he woke up, he had abilities and he was able to hone them. And then he became a part of this program. And I was just like, oh, that's very interesting. But at the same time, so far from my experience, because again, I've been chasing ghosts all my life. But when I come to UFOs and aliens, the ghost hunting communities really don't participate a lot. So I always had a fascination, but it was never a part of our conversations. We never really spent a lot of time sitting down and going, hey, should we talk about, extraterrestrials? And now there's a lot of talk about a lot of cryptids possibly just being things that are traveling interdimensionally. Like the reason why we can't find them is because they don't live here.
Yeah.
They just kind of pop in, do their thing, pop out.
Friend reminds me of the play Bug.
Yes, it does.
By Tracy Letts. Yeah. Anyway.
But yes, if you guys want to hear an episode about aliens and UFOs and stuff, I would love to talk about that because I have some interesting thoughts.
Oh, yeah, I do as well.
So if that is something you're interested in, let us know. But we're going to go ahead and sign off on this one. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have a ghost story, it doesn't have to just be Hatman. You can send it over to ghostmail at hauntedcitypodcast.com. Also, make sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram under Haunted City Podcast. And you can find us on all social media platforms under that name. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.